Welcome to the Navigating Magic podcast, where we explore the interplay between intuition, spiritual health, and your superconscious through conversations, interviews, and storytelling. Natasha teaches you how to generate change through your attention to energies, truths, and processes that are invisible to others. Together, we will explore the interplay between alchemy, astrology, and theurgy. I'm your host, Natasha Andreo. Welcome to the next episode of the Natasha Andreo Intuitive Podcast. Today, I have someone very special with us. Her name is Lyn McLean. She's the founder and managing director of EMR Australia. Lyn McLean is Australia's foremost expert on understanding and reducing exposure to electromagnetic exposures in homes, businesses, and learning environments. She has been working in this field since 1996 and brings a commitment to helping people over 2 decades of experience to her work. She has been involved in or commented on the major political and regulatory development of the last 2 decades. She has authored 4 incredible books on electromagnetic radiation, and here we are today. So thank you so much, Lyn, for being here.
It's my absolute pleasure, Natasha. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you because this is an issue that's very dear to my heart. I started in 1996, so I'm just finishing my 27th year now, and I do it because I think it's such an important issue, and we have so many people that contact us with problems and so many people who are really needing help. So I hope that what I have to say today will be helpful to people listening.
I'm sure it will be. And the reason that I asked you to even come on here is because you actually assessed our home last month, and I was just blown away by the information and the wealth of knowledge that you come with. So I'm so excited to learn more and hear what you have to say about this. And the help, like you said, the whole intention is to get awareness out into the world. I think this is such an important topic.
Yeah, I do too. And I think there are a lot of people out there at the moment who are experiencing some sort of problems, who are suffering in some way, or maybe someone in their family is, and they haven't made the connection with electromagnetic radiation. And so if you start to ask yourself, could this be connected, then you can do a little experiment and you can just see if you reduce your exposure, does it make you feel better, or does it, address some of those behavior problems and so forth. So I hope that this will help people to make that connection to what's going on in their families.
I'm sure it will. Absolutely. I mean, I've been working in schools now for nearly 15 years, and I can tell you, I think school environment is such an important one to touch on, because every classroom has Wi-Fi, and not only that, young people are addicted to technology. And
well, you work in schools. I'll tell you a story that I heard. I won't reveal the source, but a teacher told me that when she goes in to teach a class, and the kids who are going to play on their technology are over that side of the class, the ones who are going to learn are over this side of the class. And she said that the kids are learning some kids are learning basically nothing, because they're spending their entire time at school playing on their devices. And that, to me, is a concern.
I agree, and it's an unfortunate reality.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, learning to me, I think, is a lifelong opportunity. And if we enjoy learning at school, then it's something that we're going to carry through into our adult life. So it's really important to set up good habits at that point too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're very keen to hear from you. And in terms of what is electromagnetic radiation?
Well, that's a very good question to start with. I thought I would today just focus on electromagnetic radiation, which is sometimes called radio frequency radiation or wireless radiation. But what I'm talking about is the radiation that comes from all of our wireless devices, from our mobile and cordless phones to the mobile phone towers out there, to our smart technology, Wi-Fi, all of those devices that we don't need necessarily to plug into electricity.
Mm. And it's hard to, I guess, for some people, or most people, hard to imagine a life without it, even though not too long ago we were living without all these technological advancements.
Well, that's right. And technology in itself is not a bad thing, because I'm really enjoying the experience of talking to you today on technology, which we wouldn't be able to do if it weren't for the internet. But we can use it safely, or we can use it less safely. Excuse me. So it's my hope to show people how they can use it more safely today. And I should mention that I'm talking to you today on using the internet, and I've been communicating to you by email. I've spoken to your husband on the phone, but not with wireless radiation. It's all been through wired connections. So I have nothing wireless around me. It doesn't mean I can't use the technology.
Yeah. Amazing. So I guess you're here to teach us some tips for the audience, for you guys listening in. What are some ways that we can help reduce?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. I thought what we might do is start, if you don't mind, with a little bit of background, just to ask the question, like, why should we be reducing our exposure? So, okay, if I start with that. All right. So, why should we protect our home and our families from this wireless radiation in the first place? So I'm going to say that there are 6 good reasons for doing that. And here they are. You might be able to see them there. The first one is health. Now, wireless radiation has been associated with quite a lot of health problems, brain tumours, reproductive problems, both for males and females, but particularly for men's sperm. It's been shown to make sort of changes that are consistent with infertility. It's been shown to damage DNA, cause breaches of the blood-brain barrier, and that allows harmful chemicals to get into the brain. It causes changes to cells and hormones and genes, and it causes oxidative stress. So I won't go into these into detail, but you get the idea that it's associated with problems that will cause us to be less healthy. And in addition, it's been associated with quite a lot of symptoms. These are just a few of them, but things like sleep problems, memory and concentration problems, pain, headaches, nausea, low libido, skin problems, fatigue. I could go on and on. And some people experience those a little bit. Some people experience those a lot. And people who are very sensitive to this radiation will find that the degree of reaction that they have to this radiation is so strong that they can't tolerate to be around it, which is a concern. So that's health. Now, in addition to health, there are emotional and mental issues that are associated with this radiation. So things like depression, believe it or not, addiction, we talked about a moment ago, irritability, anxiety, stress. This radiation causes stress response in the body, even aggression and behavior problems. So maybe as I'm saying some of these things, people who are listening or watching might be thinking, oh yeah, that rings a bell. So all associated with wireless radiation. Now, when it comes to relationships, you can probably guess what I'm going to say, they're associated, or relationship problems are associated with this radiation too. So we get reduced interpersonal skills. So when people are maybe addicted to their devices and they're using this technology all the time, they're not engaging with people face to face, they're not developing interpersonal skills, and particularly for young kids, which means that it's harder for them to read body language. And if you can't read body language very well, it really puts you at a social disadvantage with people. There are also studies showing that people who spend a lot of time on wireless devices and gaming have less empathy, which is incredible, isn't it? So they're so busy killing the on-screen enemy that they lose touch with the emotions of characters in real life. Using these devices reduces attention, which makes it harder for people to listen to what's being said, and therefore it causes communication problems. There's just a little story I'll tell you about research that's been done on couples who live in the same house and might be sitting on the lounge next to each other and communicating with each other, but guess how?
Through their phone.
Through their devices, which is, you've got to wonder. So another reason for reducing exposure is to do with education. And what the research is showing is that, let's see if I can make this come up. Oops, yeah, here we go. That there are harmful effects on concentration, memory, as I said before. It's exposure to this sort of radiation and these devices is also associated with poorer learning, which is ironic because we've rolled out this technology in schools and we're telling everybody that this is a great way of learning, but there are situations where it's been shown to cause poorer learning. It also interferes with motor skills. So what kids need to be doing is using their hands, especially young kids, to use building blocks to make things and to color in and to learn how to hold pencils and things like that. And those sorts of skills are being, I can't really say lost, but their kids aren't as good at it as they used to be. And a lot of it's because they're spending more time on their digital devices where they're using their, their thumbs and not developing the use of their hands and their bodies. This sort of exposure is, and these devices reduce logical thinking. They have negative effects on literacy, as I said, negative effects on attention, and they're related to ADHD sorts of behaviours and behaviour problems. So there's some interesting research from overseas where researchers followed a group of kids whose mothers used mobile phones a lot when they were pregnant. And then they followed these kids for about 7 years. And by the age of 7, these kids who'd been exposed as fetuses had more behaviour problems than the non-exposed kids. So, I think there are some lessons to learn from that.
That really doesn't surprise me because at the moment, behaviour problems in schools is shocking. Teachers are stressed out of their heads. The workload is one thing, but the actual being in the classroom, that behaviour from the students, and teachers don't know if it's a COVID related, being in lockdown for so long, and students are just so complacent now. But I really have the connection with technology is just, it's right, it's staring at you.
Well, it's interesting too, because there are a few schools, you've probably heard about these, that introduce mobile phone bans. Yes. And fairly recently, there were some articles in the newspaper where the principal of one of the schools said, since we introduced the ban, we've noticed that kids' behaviour has improved and they're actually out in the playground communicating with each other and playing, as opposed to, sitting down and doing this. So, I guess people can try it for themselves.
Of course. Try it for a day and see if you can survive.
Yeah, that's right. Or more about that in a little while. But the last reason, the sixth reason that I think it's good to be looking at reducing our use of these wireless devices I've skipped one. It's the environment. But radiation has been shown to have negative effects on the environment too, and on plants, animals, birds, insects, including the critical pollinators like bees, and also marine life and the atmosphere. So, we're not just talking about what's going on in our own homes, we're talking about a much bigger picture than that.
Mm.
So that brings me to point number 6, which is safety and security. And we know that these devices can be used for tracking, and they can be hacked. And what that means is that our privacy and security are being compromised too.
Mm.
So I hope that that paints just a little tiny picture of what's going on in society. All of these things have negative impacts for either us personally, our society, or our environment, and we can do something about it. So let's move on. Oh, sorry. I just wanted to say one more thing about health, that a few years ago, the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified this wireless radiation as a class 2B carcinogen. Now, that's a possible carcinogen, and it's in the same category as lead. And we don't go putting lead all through our homes and our schools. And the reason that they classed it as a class 2B carcinogen and not as, a stronger level of cancer-causing effects was because there weren't many animal studies available at the time. But what's happened since then is there's some really major animal studies that have been published, and what they're finding is the same sort of effects as was seen in this research. So there's now even more evidence of carcinogenicity than there was back then.
I did read something the other day that mentioned that cows living under the big power lines had lower insemination rates than the cows down the road who weren't, grazing under the big power lines.
Yeah, that's right.
That speaks for itself.
Oh, that's right. And I think it's interesting because when you study sets of people or animals, these ones are exposed, these ones aren't, then you see the effects. And a lot of this research was done on mobile phone users. So the researchers were comparing people who used mobile phones for long periods of time with those who hadn't used them at all, which you could do back then because there were still people who didn't use mobile phones all the time. And just also to make the point that there are a lot of scientists and doctors out there who are concerned about this radiation. And some of them are so concerned that they joined this appeal. This is the international appeal endorsed by over 400 scientists. And they wrote to the European Union and the World Health Organization. And this is what they said, that effects of this radiation include increased cancer risk, cellular stress, increase in harmful free radicals, genetic damage, structural and functional changes of the reproductive system, learning and memory deficits, neurological disorders, and negative impacts on general well-being in humans, plus harmful effects to both plant and animal life.
Mm.
And you can see that appeal, and you can read it in full, that reference there. So what they did was they called on these bodies to introduce more protective guidelines, that is guidelines for standards, to encourage precautionary measures and to educate the public about health risks, particularly to children and fetal development. So this is a lot of eminent doctors and scientists, and these are people who've done work in this area and who know the research, saying, well, we've actually got to do something about this problem.
Mm.
So that brings us to, well, who or what is protecting us? Now, people who are listening might think we're already protected because there's a standard in place that determines how much radiation we can be exposed to, and there is, and this is it. This is the Australian standard that was developed by ARPANSA, and ARPANSA is a government agency, and it's the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency. And this standard is based on an international standard by a group called ICNIRP, which stands for the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. And don't worry, you don't have to remember these acronyms. But these are some of the key documents, the ones that are relevant for us in Australia, and the ones that determine a lot of the standards that are set in many countries around the world. So that's what we have protecting us. But how well do they protect us? And that's the the $60 million question. And recently, a paper was published, in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, it was published by the International Commission on the Biological Effects of Electromagnetic Fields. So this is a commission that's made up of a lot of experts in various disciplines that are all, you know, that are all related to wireless radiation. And they published this paper, and look what they said. They said these exposure limits, so those are the international ones that we talked about, which are based on false suppositions, do not adequately protect workers, children, hypersensitive individuals, and the general population from short-term or long-term exposures.
Why does that not surprise me?
This is, you know, it's such an important document because they don't just make this statement, they actually point out the science that backs up what they're saying. And I won't go into it all now, but I'll just tell you a little background story about it. That what they say in this paper is that the guidelines, the EMF guidelines, they're based on just 2 studies, and these studies were done in the 1980s. 2 studies. One was done on 5 monkeys, one was done on 8 rats, very small studies, and these animals were exposed to wireless radiation for 30 minutes or 60 minutes. So we have small studies, very short exposures. And what the researchers did was they observed the behavior of these animals, and they were looking for things like when animals press a lever to obtain food. And what they noticed was that when the animals had been exposed to a level of radiation where their bodies heated up by 1 degree Celsius, that their behavior changed. And from that, they concluded that harmful effects on humans only occur when the body heats up by 1 degree Celsius.
Oh my goodness.
So 2 old, small studies for short periods of time on animals' behavior, and that's being applied to human health for long periods of time. So there's more to the story than that, of course, and people can read it in this paper, but it's quite a lot to read. So you can see that there's a summary of it on our website, and if people are interested, they can get into the blog page of our website, which will explain it in more detail. But basically, the scientists went through the paper and they said there are 14 different problems with those guidelines that the standards are based on. And I've just told you one of them, but they've got 13 others.
Gosh.
And they're saying, here's the science that backs up what we're saying, that these standards are not protective. So that's food for thought, isn't it?
See, it really bothers me because we are living in a world where we have, like, we're so lucky to live in Australia. We have all these amazing advancements that other countries aren't privy of, but we are supposed to, you know, I'm using that term loosely, like trust the government to guide us, and we trust them because, you know, they've got our tax money and they're supposed to be using it, you know, for good morale and good purposes. But to hear something like this, it just tells me how rigged the sector possibly could be.
Well, it really makes you wonder, because I spent many years on an APANSA committee and presenting evidence, saying, you know, here's the evidence of risk, here's another paper showing evidence of risk, here's another paper showing evidence of risk. And the outcome of those meetings was that they concluded that there was no evidence of risk. And I thought, well, this is years and years and years ago. I thought, well, that's a bit odd, isn't it? I've just given it to them. And the statements are still, there's no evidence of risk. And there clearly is. So the way that they're using language is different to the way that you and I would use language. What we see as evidence of risk, they are not seeing as evidence of risk. But, you know, what this paper shows is that there are many scientists around the world who are really asking questions about this and saying, well, how come we've got a standard in place that that has all of these 14 flaws and significant flaws too. So, all right. Now, where does that leave us? If the standards aren't protecting us, then who is? And the answer to that is, well, it's us. It's up to us to protect ourselves and our families. So that means it's time for us to take things into our own hands and to find our power. And I've got 12 tips about how people can do that.
I love this. And I love the pun, take things into our own hands. I'm literally visualizing me throwing my phone away.
Yeah, well, that will be an interesting conversation as we go. So I think, we tend to forget that we have got power to do things to protect our families. And these are some of the things we can do. So number one is to investigate. Now, this might sound a bit funny. Why would we have to investigate? Well, what we do need to do is we need to know what's going on around our home. If you were worried about mold in your home, the first thing you'd be doing is you'd be looking for it. You'd be looking to see where it was so you could fix it up. Now, the problem with radiation is that we can't see it. It's not visible like mold. It's invisible. So you can't tell that it's there just by looking. So how do you find out if it's there? Well, you really need to measure. And if you need a good quality meter like this one, you can go around your house, you can check it out and see, is there any radiation in this spot, perhaps on your child's bed, on your bed, in your child's classroom? What's coming from this particular device that your child is using? Are these fields problems? Do you need to do anything about it? Or are you happy with those levels of radiation? So if you've got that information, that's the point at which you can then make decisions. So I think that that's a really important thing to do. And everybody can do it. You don't have to be an electrical engineer or a scientist. You press the button, you turn it on, and it's going to tell you fairly quickly whether you're in a zone that's relatively okay or where there's high radiation.
Where can we get one of these devices from?
Oh, well, you can get them from us, but you have to be quick because we don't have many left. We have a new meter that measures the same frequencies, but it also measures the higher 5G frequencies that we don't really have much in Australia yet. That's the millimeter wave frequencies that people might have heard about. They will be coming, most likely because the carriers have bought spectrum for them. So we can expect that in the future. So we'll be moving towards meters that measure that as well. And there's only one of those in the world at the moment that's suitable for the layperson to use.
Yeah.
The trouble is it's a lot more expensive. So this is a great meter for measuring what's around your home right now.
Great.
Right, so that's tip number one, investigate. Tip number two is to do a digital detox. So detoxing is big in society at the moment, isn't it? Everybody knows what I'm talking about. Get rid of all the stuff that you don't want in your body. Well, this is about getting rid of all the digital stuff that you don't want in your home. So have a look around your home. Ask yourself, do you really, really need it? And sometimes your answer might be no. So, for example, there's a picture here of a wireless mouse. And the question is, do you need a wireless mouse? And the answer is no, because a wired mouse will do exactly the same thing without irradiating you. And the same thing with a wireless keyboard. Do you need a wireless keyboard? Again, no, not really, because you can do exactly the same thing with a wired keyboard. Yeah. No radiation. So you get the picture. So if you have a look around, you'll be able to see probably lots of things that you can get rid of. Don't give them to your neighbours or your friends. Recycle them with electronic waste.
Yeah.
Recycling. I was listening to a news item on the radio the other day, and it was that recently there's been a huge reduction in plastic waste. I can't remember the exact figures because it was driving at the time, but I thought, well, that's great, isn't it? But what does that tell us? It tells us, well, we didn't actually need it in the first place.
So true.
Yeah. And I think it's the same with this. There are a lot of devices in people's homes that really we don't actually need. So another one that comes to mind is wireless light globes. Who really needs a wireless light? Who needs a light globe that's irradiating them? I'm not sure that that's terribly necessary.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and wireless toys. A lot of kids have got wireless dolls and dolls that do all sorts of things. And again, do we really need them? Do we really want our kids to be using them? Because when they're using them, they're being exposed. There was a story not so long ago about a wireless doll that was connected to the internet, so it could do all sorts of clever things, but it had been hacked. So people were able to watch the children who were engaging with the doll through the doll.
That's horrible.
Yeah.
I don't think any parent would want that for their child.
Yeah. So I think we have to be aware of what these technologies are capable of and how they're being used. And I tell you what, I don't think my kids, when they were growing up and they had the plain ordinary dolls, I don't think that they, looked around them and thought, oh my goodness, this is terrible. It's not wireless. This is my kids were growing up before wireless dolls, but the point is kids can be happy with,
of course,
toys that are not wireless.
When you assessed our house, Nick's wireless keyboard and mouse did come up on your list of the things that we need to change, and that was just such an easy fix to go online and to buy something with a wire. When we earlier this year we moved into our home, a conversation between us that was rather fascinating was buying a toothbrush.
Oh, right.
Electronic toothbrush, and we noticed that every single toothbrush had Bluetooth.
Truly
Connects to your phone app, and then it tells you when you need to brush your teeth and when you need to change the head, and God knows what else it could tell you. And we just thought, why do we need that? So it was actually very hard. Out of, I think, 28 options, there were only 2 options without Bluetooth.
Yeah, and you're right. We don't need any of that. These become gimmicks, I think, to sell products, and people think, oh, this is something different, I'll get it. But I think we have to ask ourselves those questions with everything we buy. Is this going to be good for us? Do we need to irradiate our teeth? Do you actually want the information about your toothbrushing habits to be available online, for example? Right. So there will be interesting exercise to see what people find in their homes that they can get rid of. And that's going to be different from, one person to another.
Of course.
Right. Tip number 3 is to be conscious of protecting kids. Now, people are probably thinking, well, why is she saying that? Because, of course, we want to protect our kids. But I really want to emphasize how important it is, because children are more vulnerable to radiation than older people, and certainly much more vulnerable than adults. And that's because they've got thinner skulls, so the radiation can penetrate further. It's also because as they're growing, their cells are actively growing and dividing. And it's at that stage of cell growth that a cell is more vulnerable to radiation. And it's because kids have got a lifetime potentially of exposure. So there has never in the history of the planet been a situation where kids were exposed from when they were a fetus for the rest of their lives. So we don't know what that's going to look like in society. We don't know how these kids are going to be in 20, 30, 50, 70 years' time. We don't know whether they're going to grow up strong and healthy or they're not. But what we do know is that when you look at the experiments on animals, like mice, because they've got short life spans, that we see problems down the track. We see problems in, the next generation, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we really need to be aware that we don't have all the answers yet, and that we're taking a risk by exposing kids. The other thing I think about kids is that's so important to me is if we don't teach kids to use technology safely, then they might never, ever, ever learn to do that. And they mightn't be able to teach their kids how to use technology safely. They mightn't even know that it's important. So by setting up safe technology in your home and I guess monitoring how your kids use it, that's a life skill for kids.
Yeah. It's more and more similar with schools, but you go to cafes and restaurants and it's just become the thing that parents do. It's just, okay, get the tablet, get the iPad out because it's gonna, shut them up and babysit their kids.
Yeah. Well, that's true, but there was babysitting before mobile phones. I can remember when my kids were young, wherever we would go, if it was in the car for an outing, there was a box of books next to them and games and things like that, and my kids were entertained for hour after hour after hour, and they didn't need to be irradiated in the process. So there's so many good products out there that your kids would really benefit from without having to play around with a mobile phone, because what that's doing is it's setting them up for addiction.
Yeah.
And addiction clinics now are seeing tiny children. They're seeing children as young as 4.
Gosh, that's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's alarming. And we see products like this. You can see here the wireless potty. So children can't even go to the toilet now without having a screen in front of them. And we see kids with Bluetooth headsets and tablets and using their parents' laptops. And again, we've got to ask: is this the best for our kid? And I know that some parents will say, "Oh well, the technology is going to be around when they get older. It's developing useful skills." Well, I would say it's developing some useful skills at the expense of other useful skills, as we saw before.
It's this balance. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a big problem with Bluetooth headphones, those earpods that are sold, with all the Apple phones and all the latest, and it's like people have forgotten about wired headphones, which work perfectly fine. And, they may not look as cool, or, I don't even think having a wireless, little thing in your ear looks cool, but it's become trendy.
It has. And I've seen kids in schools with those on, and I've measured there's a lot of radiation coming from them. And what worries me is that when you look at the brain tumor research, that's showing that people who used mobile phones for long periods of time had greater risks of brain tumors. And there's research showing that the younger people were, when they used mobile phones, the more likely they were to develop brain tumors. So kids at that stage, when that study was done, it was kids who were under 20 when they started using a mobile phone. And I think from memory, they had 5 times the risk of developing brain tumors. And that's when the phone's held out here against the ear. But these things are inside the ear, so they're that much closer to the brain.
It's frying the brain.
Yeah, well, it's certainly increasing exposure. So, and this will sort of give you a bit of an example of what I'm talking about. That's a mobile phone, the block there, the rectangle. And this is a study that shows radiation absorption into the head. And it's not really clear here, but the head on the right-hand side is an adult head where the skull is about 2 millimeters thick. And this shows how much radiation was absorbed by an adult head, and the radiation's in white there. Now, in the middle here, we see the skull of a 10-year-old child, which is about 1 millimeter thick. And you can see how much more radiation is absorbed. And that's what bit more than half the brain, maybe round about half the brain.
Gosh.
Yeah. But look, this is a 5-year-old child's on the left-hand side. And what we see now is that the 5-year-old is absorbing so much more radiation than either the 10-year-old or the adult. And the 5-year-old's skull is about 0.5 millimeter thick. So I think there's, that really tells us something, doesn't it? It really tells us about what's happening to our kids when they're using these devices close to their body.
Yeah. See, I've like been fortunate enough to tell students about this, and I'm all about education and awareness. And I'm really amazed by their response, because some students are like, okay, well, if that's not good for me, I'm going to stop using it. But you'd be surprised, and I'm like, so just, I don't know what word to use to sum up their response. For the other half literally just say, I don't care. I need my
Absolutely.
headphones,
Yeah.
and I'm still, I need my phone, and I'm going to use it.
And it's very easy not to care when you're a young, healthy, vibrant, athletic, I don't know, 15-year-old, 18-year-old, but it's not such a great idea when you're an older person and you're looking back and you think, gee whiz, I wonder if I'd done things differently a few decades ago, whether I'd be feeling a bit healthier now. So it's a concern. I think all you can do is give people the information, and the decision they make is up to them, but I'd rather they make it from an informed position than an uninformed position.
Only yesterday, I received a message from an ex-student I taught in 2016 that she has a brain tumor.
Oh,
And she would be now maybe 21 years old, 20 or 21 years old. And I'm just so saddened by that. I personally know this is now would be the 6th person in the last 1 year to have been diagnosed with brain tumors.
that's just heartbreaking. And I remember, I'm sure a lot of your viewers will remember too, Charlie Teo, the brain tumor surgeon, talked quite a lot on the media about the number of young people that he was seeing coming in to consult him with brain tumors. And he was very concerned about mobile phone radiation, and said to people, reduce the use of mobile, reduce your exposure to mobile phone radiation. And another Australian brain tumor surgeon was Dr. Vinnie Karana, and he was seeing the same thing and talking about the same thing. And he wrote a few papers where one was on mobile phone base stations, and he was saying, look, here's the evidence that this radiation is causing things like cancer. So brain tumor surgeons are noticing these increases too, and it's heartbreaking to think that there could have been a different outcome, perhaps.
Of course.
So let's move on to tip number 4, and that's keep a distance. So the closer a person is to a source of radiation, the more exposure they're getting from it, which stands to reason. So keep these devices, these wireless radiating devices, away from the head, away from men's testicles. We said before that there's quite a lot of research showing harmful effects on male sperm, and a lot of it's because men keep their mobile phones in their pockets. It's really close to their reproductive organs. So don't do that. And again, there are scientists saying get them out of your pockets. Keep these away from your fetus. I mean, how many pregnant women rest their mobile phones on their baby bump or hold it really close to their baby bump? That radiation is going straight into that fetus. And there's something called Brexting too. Have you heard of Brexting?
Yes.
People
Right.
breastfeeding their child while they're texting on their phones. And this lady is actually doing that. And you can see how close her child's head is to that phone. So there's no question about it. That radiation is affecting the head of her child.
Mm.
Yeah, I think we have to be aware that our mum's use of her mobile phone is affecting her children if the children are close to her as well. People carry their mobile phones in their bras. There are studies where the scientists have looked at this and found that some women, or showed case studies of women who carried their mobile phones in their bras, and they developed tumors in exactly the spot where the antennas of the phones were. And there's so many scientists now saying, get these things out of your bras, keep them away from your body, because with smartphones, it's even worse, because the smartphones are sending out radiation a lot. They're not connected to the mobile phone all the time, but they keep sending out messages. Here I am, download this, update that. You don't even have to be talking on your phone for the phone to be transmitting a signal. And if it's sending a signal far enough to connect with a mobile phone tower, it's certainly going far enough to penetrate sensitive breast tissue.
Yeah. When you say keep a distance, I'm curious to know how far, like if, for instance, if a mother is breastfeeding her child, how far away should the phone be?
Rooms away. It's hard to answer that question because different people have different levels of sensitivity. So I know people in my network who are very sensitive, and they can't be around somebody else using a mobile phone. So if they're in a room or a bus or a train where someone's using a mobile phone, that will affect them. So even though the phone might be, right over there, they're still affected. So we don't know. The baby's not able to tell us what level of exposure it's able to tolerate. We don't know. But I wouldn't have it in the same room.
Yeah.
And it depends on the phone too, because some of these phones are operating at really high power now, because again, they're getting that signal from here, from the phone, right out there to the mobile phone tower, which is going to be who knows how far away.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So keep them away from the body. And of course, that goes for kids too. We don't want kids carrying these phones.
Of course not.
Against their bodies. All right, so tip number 5 is to reduce exposure time. And here we've got a boy with his mobile phone turned on in the bed. Now, we know of stories where kids go to bed with their mobile phone underneath their pillow. So close, centimeters away from their head. And they do that so that when the phone rings, it doesn't disturb the parents. The parents don't know that they're on the phone in the middle of the night. So that's a concern, because you can just imagine how much radiation they're getting from that. And these days, there's that other phenomenon where people don't use alarm clocks anymore. They use their mobile phone right next to their bed, which means, of course, that all night that radiating device is sitting there turned on, and that it's irradiating the person or the people sleeping in that bed.
I'm curious to know if a child, like if someone is an adult and they did this 10 years ago, 15 years ago, sleep with their phone under their head, I mean, are there any measures we can do to help, I guess, detoxify some of that radiation?
Well, it's not in the body. That's the thing. It goes into the body and it affects the body while that person's in the signal. But then the person's out of the signal. There's no more radiation. That those cellular changes have, if they're going to be made, they've already been made. Those changes will continue to be made over time. So the longer a person is exposed, the more likely they are to have effects. So it's not something that you can detox. However, there is research showing that not just people, but animals too, if they were given treatments of a high dose vitamin C, vitamin E, other antioxidants that helped counteract the damaging effects of this radiation. So that's probably a good thing to be doing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Good to know.
So mobile phones near the bed, some people say, well, it's on airplane mode, so I don't have to worry. But airplane mode doesn't work all the time in modern phones. So you can have your phone on airplane mode, think there's no radiation coming from it, but there might be. So the only way you can find out if airplane mode works on your phone is to actually measure your phone when it's in airplane mode.
Wow. Those devices are going to come in very handy.
Yeah, that's right.
Measuring device, yeah.
So that's one place where people spend a lot of time and tend to irradiate themselves. Another place is the car. So if you're driving around a lot in your car and you've got Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and so forth turned on, then you're getting quite a lot of exposure over quite a long period of time. So my challenge is for people to think about how they could actually manage that exposure. I know when I bought my car, the salesman said to me, oh, look, I'm really sorry, it doesn't have Bluetooth. And I said, great, I'll have it.
It's funny how that was an apology point for him, because most people now live on Bluetooth because, like Sydney traffic speaks for itself. We're in the car longer and longer. Depends on where you work and what your traveling purposes are, but Bluetooth in the car is a big selling point for people.
Well, that's right. But the problem with a car is, you see, you're in a metal shell, and the problem with a metal shell is it reflects the signal. So if you're in a car on a mobile phone, that signal is being reflected by that metal shell back and forward and back and forward. So you're potentially increasing your exposure. Yeah. So an enclosed metal space like a car or a lift, that's the worst possible place that you can be using a mobile phone. So you can get into the settings in most cars and turn off the wireless and the Bluetooth. So people can think about that.
Good to know.
Yeah, and another place where people spend a lot of time and manage to expose themselves is their desks at work. So even if they've not got a computer, they've often got their mobile phone sitting next to them turned on. So if you're at work for 8 hours a day and you've got your mobile phone next to you turned on, again, that's a lot of exposure. So I don't know if you have thoughts on that, Natasha.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. And, it comes back to addiction. We're addicted. We, as in society, and it's hard to function in the work world now without the phones and the apps. Like, I think I've read something that we have more technology on our phone than they did on the first trip to the moon.
I think I've heard that too. But the thing is, we don't need wireless to have internet, you see.
Okay.
So we'll talk about, we'll talk about that right now. So I'll move on to tip number 6, which is go radiation free. So people think, I actually need my Wi-Fi. Why do you need your Wi-Fi? Well, I need it for internet. Well, no, you don't. You don't need Wi-Fi for internet. You need internet. And you can have internet like I've got, where I'm talking to you now, without any radiation, because I've got radiation-free equipment. And that means instead of communicating by wireless, it's communicating through cables. So a cabled setup is so much safer.
Yeah. So that's using the LAN cable?
I was using an Ethernet cable.
Yeah.
So if you cable up all your devices, it doesn't stop the radiation. They will still be emitting radiation because they don't know that they're being cabled and they're still sending the signal out. So you can still get, although it's getting harder to get, you can still get radiation-free equipment. So you can get radiation-free modems, radiation-free routers and so forth. So that means that you're not being irradiated by that equipment.
Good.
And then well, we have radiation-free computers too, or you can turn off the radiation on your computer or your tablet so that you're able to connect, but you're not irradiating yourself in the process.
Yeah. Interesting.
Mm.
I guess that's going to take like effort, and then, you know, in the homes, getting like an electrician to come out and, you know, install like an Ethernet port in the rooms.
Oh, you can do that, but you don't need to. It just depends where you want to use it. So if you, wherever your NBN box is inside your home, then you can connect your equipment to that. So let's say, for example, that you had a study and you want to put all your computers and all your devices in the study. Then your kids want to do their homework, they can access the study, they can do their homework that way. You could have multiple computers set up if you want to. So that's one way of doing it. Or you might think, well, I want to be able to access it in this room and that room and the other room. So then you would get your electrician to come in and put ports in those rooms. So there are different ways of doing it. But sometimes I say to people, you know, you could be set up with radiation-free equipment. And they say, oh my God, I can't do that. I've got to have it all over the place. Basically, what they're saying is, I want my kids to have it in their bedrooms. And I'm thinking, do you really? Do you really want your kids on the internet in their bedrooms where you've got no control over what they're doing, or what content they're accessing, or who they're talking to?
Yeah.
There was an interesting documentary a few weeks ago where Todd Sampson was talking to different families about technology, and his focus wasn't so much on health, but he was looking at some of the other risks like cybersecurity and so forth. If kids use and adults using the internet, and it was alarming enough for even me, who's been in this issue for such a long time, to be thinking, oh my goodness, we really don't want kids to have unmonitored access to this technology. So anyway, that's for families to decide, but just think about the option of having a safe spot where kids can use this technology safely, and you know what's going on and you're in control of it.
And I guess it would blend in with like the interpersonal skills and, you know, kids, you know, getting outside, and it's all it's a beautiful cycle.
Yeah, that's right. The more you set up kids to be completely self-contained in their bedroom, the more they're going to do it, which means that the less they're doing all of those other things like the social connection and the sport and the engaging and with others and so forth. So I think there's a case to be made for limiting
Absolutely
the use of it and using radiation-free technology. So that's tip number 6. So moving on to tip number 7. So tip number 7 is avoid gimmicks. And a lot of people tell me, look, I've bought this thing, my home's safe because I've bought this thing and I've plugged it in, and so it's my home safe. And that's a bit like saying, well, you can buy a tablet and this tablet is going to fix every disease that you've got or anyone in your family's got or that society's got. And we know that you can't buy a tablet that fixes everything. And it's the same with wireless radiation. There's no single solution for all of the devices in your home and all of the, you know, the radiation you might be exposed to from outside and all of the different technologies. It's just not. So I think people have to be aware of those products on the internet that just claim magical solutions, because whatever you want on the internet, I'll pretty much guarantee you it will be there.
For sure.
It mightn't work, but it'll probably be there.
Yeah.
So beware of the products. Just because they're claimed to make your home safe or claimed to be marvelous doesn't mean that there are. And because I like history, I like this little example that during the Middle Ages, people used to buy a rabbit's foot. Sorry, I shouldn't say this to you. but they used to buy a rabbit's foot and they would tie it around their neck, and that was to protect them from the plague.
Wow.
Yeah. So did it work? Well, I'm guessing it probably didn't.
Yeah.
But throughout history, people have wanted the solutions, whether they worked or not. But what I keep saying to people is don't buy anything until you actually know that it's right for your particular problem. So if you want to shield radiation from a mobile phone or mobile phone tower, there'll be different solutions altogether. So you have to know what your problems are. As I said, right at the start, number one, investigate, find out your problems, because they'll all have different solutions. And the next tip is, if you're going to buy something, find out that it works, ask for the test reports, make sure that you are convinced that this is a product that's going to do the job you want it to do.
Of course. Fascinating.
Yeah. And I'm always hearing people say, oh, I heard about this on the internet or that on the internet. And it makes people feel good to have something in their home that is claimed to do things. But, if you're going to spend money, you might as well spend it on something that's going to work.
We've actually held off from buying one of those doorbells where you can see who's at the door. And they've got this like a membership where you pay, I don't know, $7 a month, and it's connected to your phone. So you could be anywhere in the world and have a look, have the permanent camera at your doorbell, at your front door, to see who's there.
That's right. There are lots of things like that. And I have to ask myself, how much of an advantage is that compared to the cost? And by cost, I mean the risk or the exposure.
Yeah.
So those are the things that people will need to weigh up. And you can get wireless just about anything. So you can get wireless, I think, thermometers. You can get, I've seen smart pajamas for kids.
Oh my gosh, that's taking it too far now.
Yeah, that's right. And so just because something can be done doesn't mean it's necessarily a good thing to do. And that's where people have to think about, well, am I getting it because it just sounds really cool and trendy and exciting and new and novel? Or am I getting it because it's really going to improve my family's health and life? And what's the most important thing? So, tip number 8. So, this is, be cautious about shielding. And I say this as somebody who sells these shielding products. So there are good shielding products out there. We've got them. There are shielding paints. There are shielding fabrics for curtains. There are shielding window film, for example. And they do a great job. But please don't go and buy them yet. And the reason is that there can be unexpected problems from shielding a person's home. So if somebody today were to shield their home right now, if you could make it happen, completely block all the radiation coming in from outside, block your ceiling, block your walls. If you're in a flat, block the floor. If you could create a perfect shield, would that be a good thing? And I'll bet lots of people are thinking, yeah, that would be great. And my answer is no, it could be terrible. It could make your exposure worse, because just imagine you've got your home shielded and you've got your Wi-Fi and your mobile phones and your baby monitors and all those things inside, all giving out radiation, but it's trapped inside now.
Oh, yeah.
And it's bouncing from one shielded surface to another, like we saw in the car. So what you've done is you've potentially increased your exposure.
Double-edged sword.
Yeah, that's right. And if you were to go into the average house and you were to measure how much radiation is coming from outside and how much radiation is coming from inside, in the majority of homes now, well, you guess, Natasha, guess what I'm going to say.
Oh, the outside.
It's the inside.
Oh gosh,
from
yeah.
people's own equipment in the majority of homes. So it won't be true for everybody, but most people's exposure is coming from their own equipment. So why would you be shielding
Of course.
and trapping all of that in?
Fascinating.
Yeah. So if you, let's say you've got a mobile phone tower out there and you don't want the radiation from that, yes, you can shield that radiation, but the first thing you'd have to do is you have to address all your internal sources.
Yeah. So the 5G towers really concern me. They're popping up everywhere. In our neighborhood, we didn't personally get it, but maybe 4 kilometers away, five. One of the neighbors got a letter saying, Telstra are bringing in this fantastic 5G tower. We wanted your opinion and wanted to let you know about it. And it's good that the local council is offering that voice, giving that voice to the people. But I don't know how much that will make an impact.
Yeah. The thing is, a lot of people say the same thing. I'm really concerned about a 5G mobile phone tower. But the question is why? Why would somebody be concerned about that? And I think the reason people are concerned about it is been a lot of hype about it on social media, some of which is deserved, but some of which isn't. So the 5G that we've got in Australia now, that's commonly around, is not much different to these other frequencies that we're talking about. So in the future, we will have higher 5G frequencies, the millimeter wave frequencies, and that's where I think a lot of the concern is. But we don't have much of that in Australia, hardly any in Australia at the moment. There are those frequencies in some countries overseas, more so than us, but don't be concerned about something just because it's 5G. Be concerned about it because it's wireless, because you might be reacting, not you personally, but someone might be reacting more to their Wi-Fi than to the 5G tower out there. Some of the 5G towers are reusing the 2G frequencies.
Oh,
so
gosh. Okay.
Yeah, so it's not like this is necessarily a huge disaster for society. Well, no more than 2G and 3G and 4G were. So I think we have to look at our exposure from all different sources. And the moral of the story is if you want to get rid of the radiation from out there, from the phone tower, first of all, address this internal radiation.
Fascinating.
Right. So tip number 9. Now, this one might sound a bit funny. Grow your kids. And by grow your kids, what do I mean? I mean, encourage your kids to develop in ways that are being stunted by too much device use. And we talked about some of those things before about kids being depressed because they're spending a lot of time on social media, kids not having good social skills, not having empathy, their attention span not being very good, them not learning, not being able to concentrate, having behavior problems, all of these things that are linked to technology. Let's see what we can do to counteract that. And some of the things that we can do to counteract it are these. We can encourage kids to get out in nature. And interestingly, they've found that nature is an antidote to stress. And we know that device use creates stress response in the body. This is a way of undoing that or compensating for it or counteracting it. So get out into nature. And I mean off the devices.
Of course.
Encourage kids to use their imagination because it's not being developed in ways that it used to be. A lot of the imaginative stuff is already done for kids. If they're on some of those games, it's not their imagination that's being extended, it's the imagination of the person who developed the game that's the creative skill. But there's nothing like it nothing better than for kids to be reading books and to be visualizing these imaginary worlds, or for kids to be playing imaginary games. I think that's stimulating creativity is so important for being a rounded adult, actually.
Of course.
Physical play, we know that kids, there's talk about obesity and kids sitting in front of computers and devices and not wanting to get up and move around. Well, we want to see them up and moving and playing and using their bodies and using all the parts of their bodies. And we want to see them engaging socially and developing those sorts of skills.
Of course.
So it just reminds me of an interesting study that was done a few years ago, where a researcher sat in a fast food outlet, and she was monitoring the behavior of families at the tables in the fast food place. And she was watching what happened when parents spent time on their devices. And so she found that when parents would sit down, that the food's been shared out, the parents on their mobile phone, what they're not paying attention to their kids. And so the kids' behavior started to change. And this researcher observed that the kids were getting naughtier and naughtier and naughtier in order to attract the mother's attention. So, it's interesting that even the adults' use of technology is affecting kids' behavior. Right. So tip number 10, right, this is think about others. Now, we carry our mobile phones around. They're turned on. We sit down in the bus with our mobile phone in a pocket. There's somebody sitting 10 centimeters away from us. So what's happening to them? The radiation from our phone is going straight into their bodies. Now, what's important is that some people are more sensitive to radiation than others. And I mentioned before that some people develop symptoms and some people react with severe symptoms from exposure, to the point where they're almost got to be isolated from society because they can't be near other people's wireless devices. So you think about that. They can't use a bus. They can't use a train. They can't go into a shopping centre. They can't even go to meetings like support groups because the other people there have got their mobile phones turned on and they won't turn them off.
Yeah.
So for people who are really sensitive, their lives are hell. And I think, and for people who are old or people who are not well, some of those tend to be more sensitive. So I think we need to realize as device users that what we do affects not just us and our bodies and our children, but it affects the wider community. It affects the people around us. So I don't think that's being talked about enough, really. And because I have conversations with some of these people who are affected, and because I hear them break down on the phone and in tears, and because I hear about what hell their lives have been, and I see videos with people trying to tell their stories from around the world, I'm very sympathetic, and I think that it's so important that we build an inclusive society where everybody can participate and not just not just shove people out when they don't fit in with our comfort around technology. So that brings us to tip number 11, and that's discover more, be informed, because I think, and maybe I'm biased, but I think this is one of the most important issues on the planet at this time. Humanity has completely changed the energetic environment of this planet. And that's impacting, as we saw, not just on people, but on animals, on the atmosphere, on our pollinators, and so forth. So we need to understand this issue. We need to look at it. We need to know more about it. And we've got lots of resources for people who are interested in this. We've got a website, we've got blogs that are emailed out once a week that look like this blog on the right here. There's a little video, a little audio message at the start, and then information. So we try to make it really easy for people to understand the latest news and research and so forth. We have podcasts like you do. We have newsletters, we've got social media posts, we've got an online course, which is this one called Your Electromagnetic Safe Home, which teaches people how to measure their homes and to make them safe. So, with lots more information than we've had a chance to go through today. So there's lots of information. I would really encourage people to go and have a look at that and see how you can tap into those resources in a way that's most comfortable to you.
Of course.
And my last tip is, tell others, please, if you think that there's anything important in what I've said or on our website, then share it with other people so they get to find out too, because what we want is other people to be healthy and to have healthy children and healthy homes and to be creating a healthier future for us too. So we don't see this issue covered in the media these days. So if we're going to spread the message, it needs to be through our networks. So I would love it if people would tell others about this too.
And you can find Lyn's details on EMR-Australia.com.au.
That's the website there. So
one step ahead of you.
You are. So I hope that those tips will be helpful to people, and it might just encourage people to think a little bit about what's going on in their homes and families and how they could change it. And if they want to change it, and a lot of people will say, no, I don't, that's okay. It's an informed decision. But for those who do want to make changes, we love to hear that and love to perhaps help people along that journey.
Of course. Well, after you assessed our home, I was just blown away, like I said earlier, about just being mindful of things. Like I was a bit concerned when our air purifier came back with a high reading. And I remember emailing you and I said, oh, does that mean I need to get rid of this? And you said, no, just don't have it near your head when you sleep. And that was simple.
Absolutely. It's such an easy fix. And there will be high exposures to various things in everybody's home. It will be impossible, I think, to not have that somewhere. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a problem. It's whether you're affected by it, whether it's close to you. And the trouble with these wireless devices now is that the radiation travels so far that you can be down the street from some of these new Wi-Fi systems and you can be still irradiated. That's how strong the signal is. So we really need to be understanding what we're putting in our homes and whether we really mean to be putting that in our homes at all. And that brings me to the smart home, which I haven't talked about, but I guess is implied by all of this, that now you can get smart light globes and smart fridges and smart washing machines and smart everything's. And we're going to have to choose, do we want a refrigerator that connects to the internet? And I have to say, from many, many years of using a fridge, I can't really see that would benefit my life very much at all. So do we want to be exposing ourselves to that radiation for maybe no benefit? And we really are going to have to be mindful about this increasingly in the future, I think.
So fascinating. This was an amazing discussion that we've had. I really want to thank you for your time. The invaluable information that you've presented is surely going to make people think twice about what's in their home and things that they're intending on purchasing. I personally highly recommend Lyn for an in-home assessment. That's something that we were really proactive about because we wanted to make sure that our home was safe. on the inside and the outside, because like we've said, like to summarize, like, you know, the invisible is what counts more so than what you can visibly get your hands on and see and touch and experience. So there's so many things that that you do have control over.
Absolutely.
Empowering you, your family, your life, your home and your body is so important in this day and age, because the science speaks for itself, the statistics, the research, it's all there. And now the choice is what you do with it.
That's absolutely true. And thank you for your kind words. I think we have to remember that we have the power on this issue. And if we all bought perfectly safe and healthy products, whether we're talking about radiation emitting devices or foods, then we will be supporting those industries that produce them and, you know, helping to make them more available for other people in society too.
Really good point there. Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah. Well, this is why we have incredible people like you doing the research, paving the way for so many. And like, it must be a privilege to be in your position, knowing that you're helping the people that come into your world.
You do the best you can and hope that that is enough, and hope that, you know, helping that you got enough information out to be able to help as many people as you can, basically.
Of course, yeah.
So thank you for that opportunity, Natasha. It's been a really great pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks, Lyn.
Thank you.
Wherever you're listening from, if you can give us a review and a 5-star rating, that would be so helpful in supporting this podcast. If this episode lights you up and inspires you, then please make sure that you share this podcast and make sure that you tag me on Instagram. I am beyond grateful and so blessed to call this work. It just means so much. Together, we will learn and grow. Staying anchored in your heart means staying anchored to your humanity. All my love, Natasha.